The wind had been worrying the trees all afternoon, a low, restless sound like an animal pacing outside a fence. Snow pressed itself against the window panes of my cabin, blurring the world into white breath and shadow. I remember thinking how quiet a life can become when you choose it that way, quiet enough that even your own memories tread softly. I had lived alone so long that silence felt earned, like a promise kept. Then came a knock. Not loud, not demanding, just a small, breaking sound, as if whoever stood outside was afraid the door itself might turn them away. I didn't move at first. In the mountains, a knock can be trouble. It can be hunger or cold, or a past you buried and hoped would stay buried. I stood there, hand resting on the back of a chair, listening to the wind swallow the sound again. Then it came once more, followed by a voice, thin and trembling, carried through the cracks of the door. "Please, sir." When I opened it, the night rushed in with her. Snow clung to her shawl, to her lashes, to the deep lines carved by years of worry. The old woman stood bent but unbroken, hands clasped together like she was holding herself upright by prayer alone. Behind her, half hidden by her frame, was a young woman folded inward by pain, her breath coming in sharp, uneven pulls. I could tell before either of them spoke what was happening. There is a look a woman carries when life is trying to force its way through her too soon. "My daughter is in pain," the old woman said. Her voice cracked on the word daughter, as if saying it aloud cost her something. "Please, just for the night. Let her give birth here." The girl, Eliza, I would learn later, kept her eyes down. Shame hung on her heavier than the snow. One hand pressed hard against her belly. The other clutched at her mother's sleeve like she might fall if she let go. I knew them then, not by name, but by rumor. The town was small. Stories traveled faster than kindness ever did. An unmarried girl. A pregnancy no one wanted to claim. A family that had become something people whispered about after church. For a moment, I did nothing. The cold crept across the threshold, numbing my boots, my thoughts. I thought of the town, of the looks, the questions, the way mercy is always measured and found excessive. I had built my life on the edge of all that, high enough in the hills that judgment didn't often climb this far. Letting them in meant letting the world back inside my walls. The old woman saw the hesitation. She straightened, just a little, pride warring with desperation. "We won't be trouble," she said quickly. "We'll be gone by morning. I swear it." Another pain seized the girl. She gasped, a sound so raw it seemed to scrape the air itself. That sound did what words cannot. It reached past my caution, past the years I'd spent convincing myself I owed nothing to anyone. I stepped aside, didn't say yes, didn't need to. Sometimes mercy moves without making a sound. The fire was low but alive. I added wood, watched the flames rise like they were glad to be given purpose again. I fetched water, laid out what clean cloth I had. The old woman, Margaret, thanked me too many times, her gratitude spilling over like she didn't know where to set it down. The girl apologized instead, for the mess, for the pain, for existing where she wasn't wanted. I told her nothing, just nodded, placed a steady hand where it was needed, then stepped back. I learned long ago that some moments don't want commentary. They want presence. Outside, the storm thickened. Snow pressed harder against the cabin, sealing us in. Inside, the girl's breathing filled the room. Each breath a small battle won and lost again. Margaret whispered prayers I didn't recognize, her voice fraying with fear. I stayed close enough to help, far enough to give them what dignity the world had already tried to strip away. At one point, Eliza looked up at me. Her eyes were bright with tears, but there was something else there too. Surprise. Maybe that I hadn't turned her away. In that look, something in me shifted. I remembered another night, years ago, another woman's breath fading in a room that had felt just as small, just as heavy. I had sworn then I would never stand that close to loss again. The night wore on. Time stretched, slowed, became something you could almost touch. Pain came in waves, and between them there were pockets of stillness, so deep they felt dangerous. Margaret's hands shook as she wiped her daughter's brow. I saw fear there, not just of losing her child, but of all the ways the world had already wounded her. When the girl cried out again, louder this time, I knew the night was far from done. The storm outside howled like it meant to test us. I stood there, watching the fire burn steady and bright, understanding something I had avoided for years, that opening a door is never the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a reckoning. The worst part came just before dawn, when the fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, and even the storm seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eliza's strength was slipping. I could see it in the way her hands no longer clenched with each pain, only trembled, in the way her voice thinned until it was more breath than sound. Margaret knelt beside her, whispering encouragement that sounded like goodbye, and that frightened me more than any scream. There are moments when a man understands he has already crossed a line and can never return to who he was before. This was one of them. I spoke then, not loudly, not with authority borrowed from elsewhere, but with the steadiness of someone who refuses to let fear be the final voice in the room. I told Eliza to look at me, to stay here, to breathe with me. She did. Trust is a fragile thing, but once offered, it weighs more than stone. Time unraveled. The pain came, sharper, closer together. Eliza cried out, and then, terribly, fell quiet. For a heartbeat that felt like an hour, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and Margaret's broken sob. Then the child arrived, small and slick with life, and the silence shattered under a thin, furious cry. It was the sound of arrival, of insistence, of something new refusing to be undone. Margaret laughed and wept all at once, her hands flying to her mouth like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Eliza lay back, exhausted, eyes wet and shining, as if she had traveled somewhere terrible and beautiful and come back changed. I wrapped the child carefully, my hands unsteady in a way I had not felt in years. When I placed the baby in her arms, something loosened inside my chest. A knot I had carried so long I had forgotten it was there. Morning came slowly, pale light easing through the window. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and painfully bright. Eliza slept, the baby rising and falling against her like a promise. Margaret watched them both, her face softened by relief and a grief that had not entirely left. She thanked me again, but this time I heard something else beneath it, a fear of what waited beyond the door. The knock came late in the morning. This one was firmer. Official. Sheriff Amos Pike stood outside with 2 townsfolk hovering behind him, their curiosity thinly disguised as concern. Word travels, even through snow. He looked from me to the cabin interior, his gaze lingering where the young mother lay. Questions gathered on his tongue. I didn't give him space to ask them. I told him the girl had nearly died. I told him the child had been born under my roof in my care. And I told him, quietly, without challenge, that no harm would come to either of them while they remained there. There was no anger in my voice, just certainty. Sometimes that is what unsettles people most. The sheriff studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. The townsfolk shifted, disappointed, already searching for a softer place to lay their judgment. They left soon after, the cold swallowing them whole. When the door closed again, the cabin felt different. Lived in, claimed. Eliza stayed. At first, it was only until she regained her strength. Then it was until the baby grew steadier. Days passed, marked by small, careful gestures. I cooked. She rocked the child by the fire, humming a tune so low it felt like it belonged to the cabin itself. We spoke little. We didn't need to. Connection grew in the space between words, in shared glances, in the way she no longer apologized for her presence. One evening, as the light fell gold across the floor, she thanked me, not with the urgency of desperation, but with the calm of someone who felt seen. I told her she owed me nothing. What I didn't say was that I owed her something too. Purpose, perhaps, or the reminder that a life closed too tightly can forget how to breathe. When I asked her to stay, not just for the child's sake, but as part of this place, I didn't dress it up as charity. I spoke of work to be shared, of seasons endured together. She met my eyes, and in that look there was no shame left, only choice. She said yes with a nod, the kind that carries weight because it is freely given. Now, when I think back on that night, I understand what it taught me. That dignity is not something granted by towns or rules or whispered approval. It is something rebuilt slowly by hands willing to open doors and hearts brave enough to walk through them. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this: sometimes the life that saves you arrives in pain, wrapped in snow, asking only for a place to begin.